So Chris and I may agree on this, but Chris, it is no longer too early to start talking about the draft. It really never is.
Clearly it's not.
We've
been talking about it for 6 or 7 months already.
We just never stop. Our draft expert Ryan Wilson out with his latest mock draft, and today we are focusing on his top wide receivers. He got TCU's Quentin Johnston shooting up draft boards. USC Jordan Addison is one of the most dynamic players in the country. What about Tennessee's Jalin Hyatt? Back in September, wasn't even in the first round convo. Now Ryan has him going 21st overall. So here are Ryan Wilson's top 5 wide receivers. We talked about the top 2. Jackson Smith and Jigma hardly saw any playing time this season because of injuries. He is still one of the top wideouts in the class. And rounding out the top 5, Josh Downs from North Carolina. Is he a first rounder? That depends on who you ask, but he is leaving Chapel Hill as one of the best receivers to ever play in that program. Let's welcome in our draft expert, Ryan Wilson. And by the way, you can find his latest mock draft on CBSSports.com. Top 5 wide receivers, Ryan. Your number 1, TCU's Quentin Johnston. Look, I went back through several of your mock drafts because, Chris, we're never done talking about it. Throughout this entire calendar year, he's always been in your first round conversation. But why is he the top guy for you right now?
Well, he's 6'5", he's about 220, and he's going to run incredibly fast. I don't know what it's going to end up being once he gets to the combine or his pro day, but when you watch him play on Saturdays, he's just blowing by people consistently. Started off strong, had a little dip because of an injury, and then finished strong for TCU, and we'll get a chance to see him play in the playoffs, which is going to be fun as well. But he is such a huge target. He runs routes like he's 5'11", 185 in terms of shiftiness, and then he's a high-point catch machine down the field. So all those things check the boxes of what you're looking for in, quote-unquote, modern-day NFL wide receivers, guys that have come on recently and absolutely dominated as these sort of big-type receivers. George Pickens is obviously an example. He probably would have gone round 1 if not for the ACL injury last year. Drake London, who was the first wide receiver taken last year, is a similar size, not quite as big and probably not quite as physical. But those type of players are what NFL teams are looking for, especially for young quarterbacks who want big targets to throw the ball to downfield. So that's exactly what you get in Quentin Johnston. Now, is he going to be wide receiver 1? He is for me, but there will be some conversations, Amanda, because this draft class of wide receiver isn't quite as deep as it has been in recent years, so it's also going to be interesting to talk about.
You mentioned the size of him, 6'4", 215, 225. So let's talk about the number 2 guy on your list, USC's Jordan Addison. Big transfer for them before the season began. Went from Pitt to team up with Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley. In comparison to Johnston, he is about 6 feet, 175. How much is size going to play a factor in teams looking at him, and why is he your number 2?
I don't think it actually will, although historically, at least in recent years, wide receivers who are sub 6 feet, and we'll see just exactly how tall Addison is, and sub 180 pounds, they sometimes get pushed down to late day 2, early day 3, simply because of the size and durability questions. You have none of those things with Addison, because when you watch him play, he's probably one of the most explosive playmakers in college football, and you feel like that's going to translate immediately to the next level. Last year, Jahan Dotson was a first-round pick for the Commanders. He's a better player, similar size as Jahan Dotson, and he can do everything. He lines up a lot on the outside, but you put him inside, he has some kick return, punt return ability. And you mentioned he was at Pitt last year, and he certainly helped Kenny Pickett vault his way into the first round. And I don't know if Caleb Williams needs any help, but Caleb Williams is headed in that direction as well. They certainly both helped each other this year at UNC, and he is a special talent. And again, the question is, are teams going to be comfortable with his size? And I think the answer is yes after seeing him play. And then the matter is, how high could he end up going? Because again, this wide receiver class isn't deep like it was last year or the year before. So if you need a wide receiver, you may have to slightly overpay for one, and you see him going here to the Green Bay Packers at 14. We all know the Packers don't draft wide receivers in the first round, but wishful thinking nonetheless.
Not yet. We thought it was going to happen last season. Didn't happen until the second round there. So you mentioned the order of the draft right now. You do have your 1, 2, 3 going 1, 2, 3. With Johnston going 12 overall to the Texans, Addison 14 to the Packers. We'll see if that happens. Next up, you have Ohio State's Jackson Smith and Jigba going 16th overall. We mentioned the injuries coming into this. Why is he still your number 3 guy?
So, right, he only played a handful of games because of the hamstring, and then last week or the week before, he said, I'm just going to focus on the NFL draft. And certainly no one's going to think any less of him for that. 6, 7, 8 years ago when Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette opted out of the bowl games, it was a huge issue. Now teams understand the thinking behind it, and I don't think it's going to affect his draft stock. But what will be interesting to see, there will be comparisons with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, his teammates at Ohio State last season. Both those guys went in the first round, Olave and then Garrett Wilson. Smith-Njigba isn't quite the athlete of those guys. He plays a little bit more in the slot, but he is a dynamic playmaker. You can bring him into a team like the Patriots where he can help right away because he adds some dynamism down the field. But if you're expecting a Garrett Wilson-type player or a Chris Olave, that's not exactly what he brings to the table. He's a different wide receiver in that respect. But I don't think the fact that he didn't play much this year is going to hurt him. I mean, we can look back at Jamar Chase, who opted out his final year. Turns out he's okay. Now, this isn't the same type of wide receiver as that, but even his former teammate, Nick Bosa, he played a handful of games a few years ago and then opted out at the end of the season for Ohio State because of a core muscle injury. Didn't hurt his stock either. So I think this is going to be the same case with Jackson. It's just a matter of how teams view him and if he is, in fact, going to be a top 32 pick or if he's going to be a borderline day one, early day two type pick. Either way, he's going to be a contributor right away.
Especially with those injuries, he will not be playing for Ohio State against Georgia there in the playoffs. Someone else opting out of their bowl game, the Orange Bowl, Tennessee's Jalin Hyatt. You said in your latest mock draft, this is someone at the beginning of the season was not in the first round conversation. Why is he now?
Well, he had 15 touchdowns, and that had a lot to do with it. And obviously, Hendon Hooker, his ascension had a lot to do with Jalin Hyatt's ascension. And look, is Jalin Hyatt a first-round pick all day long? No, he's not. In fact, I have him graded more like a second-round pick. But again, need is going to outstrip supply, and if a team desperately needs a playmaker deep down the field, Jalin Hyatt could be that guy. I've had him going to the Titans in recent mock drafts, so he doesn't have to move very far, and the Titans have real needs at wide receiver. They drafted Treylon Burks last year to replace A.J. Brown, and it's not going that well. Certainly not Treylon Burks' fault, but Jalin Hyatt is a home run hitter, and that's what he does consistently. Now, the offense they run at Tennessee is going to be different than what he does in the NFL, but there's no difference in terms of running as fast as you can in a straight line and catching the football, and he does that at a high level. Now, he reminds me a little bit of Mike Wallace, who came out of Ole Miss, and Mike Tomlin used to call him a one-trick pony, and by that he meant he just ran go routes all day. But that's a good trick to know. It's better than being the guy who drops the football, and that's the trick you have. So Jalin Hyatt is going to be fun to watch this draft process, whether he does end up sneaking in the first round for a team that's in desperate need of a playmaker down the field, or if he hangs around and we see him go early on day two. Either way, I think he solidified himself as a bona fide top wide receiver in this class based on this season for the Vols.
Rounding out your top 5 wide receivers, North Carolina's Josh Downs. I've seen some mocks where he is going in the first round. Currently, he is not in your first round, still a supreme talent. I will mention he still has 2 more years of eligibility since he is your top 5, 5th wide receiver, I think is how you would say it. I'm assuming you think it's good for him to go ahead and put his name in the draft, which he already has.
Yeah, if he's announcing for the draft, I'm all for that. I don't have any issue with him trying to make some money. More power to him on that. But in terms of where he may end up, I don't have him in the first round for one reason, and we just talked about this, sort of the height and weight. And if he were 6 feet, 185, 190, it feels like it'd be a no-brainer. If he hits those marks, then we can have that conversation. But I think he's going to measure smaller than that. And I know, NFL teams historically are a little standoffish about taking wide receivers that high unless they are truly special. You can go down the list of wide receivers drafted early who have been undersized, quote unquote, and sometimes they struggle to find their way. And I think more likely is a day 2 designation. Again, not the end of the world. You can come in and contribute right away and be a game changer as a second-round pick or even a third-round pick. I just wonder if the size concerns are going to scare off some football teams. And, we've been talking about it for months now, as Chris just mentioned. Bryce Young is undersized. Teams don't want to take quarterbacks who are undersized. There's a similar feeling about wide receivers who don't have a big catch radius. The windows are smaller when you're throwing down the field. He does offer something in the return game if you want to put him there as well. So that's an added bonus. But I wouldn't put him in the first-round conversation just yet. I want to see how tall he is and how much he weighs. But there's no taking away from how special he's been for North Carolina this year.
Ryan, we're going to promo your new podcast with the first pick. As we put up the full screen, I got to ask you, how's it going and how are you going to handle all of this when you're doing mock drafts every single week and you got your podcast going down? Why should we listen?
Yeah, so it's me and our guy Rick Spielman, who was the general manager for the Vikings for the last 10 years. And if you think Pete Prisco makes fun of me, Rick Spielman is ruthless. He looks like a nice guy. Don't trust the biceps. That guy is bringing it and just whipping up on me for an hour once a week. So please listen. It would make me very happy.
There you go. That is all the promo you need with the first pick with Ryan Wilson and Rick Spielman. Ignore the biceps. Make sure to download. You can also watch now. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.